Fifth Street morning rush. Marcus Hill is power walking to the day labor corner. Miss it. And there's no work, no food, nothing. He's 17, homeless, and down to his last chance at a meal. Then he sees him, a man slumped against a storefront. Gray hair, slumped sideways, one arm twisted underneath him, but his lips are turning blue, and nobody stops. A jogger veers. A shopkeeper mutters, probably drunk. Marcus hesitates. Walking past means survival. Stopping could mean trouble, but the man's hand twitches. Barely. Marcus kneels, slides his only jacket under the man's head, feels for a pulse. Weak, uneven. His fingers brush the breast pocket. A heavy metal coin. An eagle engraved in gold. No one knows Marcus's name. No one thanks him. But in that moment, he chooses to see what everyone else ignores. And what happens next will rewrite everything he thought he knew about who he was, and who this man really is. The morning chill crept through Marcus's thin tent walls as his eyes opened to another day. Above him, cars and trucks thundered across the freeway overpass, sending tiny vibrations through the ground. He sat up carefully, making sure not to bump his head on the low ceiling he'd come to know so well. With practiced movements, Marcus folded his threadbare blanket into a neat square. Every fold mattered. Keeping things orderly helped him feel like he had some control in a world that often felt chaotic. His stomach growled, reminding him that yesterday's lunch had been his last meal. Through the tent's mesh window, he spotted Ms. Loretta struggling with a can of food outside her shelter. Her arthritic hands trembled as she tried to work the can opener. "Morning, Ms. Loretta," Marcus said softly, ducking out of his tent. "Need some help with that?" The elderly woman's face brightened. "Marcus, you're such a blessing. These old hands just won't cooperate today." He took the can and opener, working them carefully until the lid came free. The smell of beans made his stomach tighten, but he handed it back with a gentle smile. "Here," he said, reaching into his backpack and pulling out his last granola bar. He broke it in half. "Share this with me?" Ms. Loretta's eyes grew moist. "Child, you need to keep your strength up." "So do you," he replied simply, placing half the bar in her weathered palm. As he checked his backpack for the day ahead, he noticed another resident, Tom, fighting with a broken strap on his bag. Without hesitation, Marcus pulled a thread from his hoodie sleeve. "Hold still," he said, kneeling beside Tom's bag. His fingers worked quickly, weaving the thread through the torn fabric until the strap was secure again. "Thanks, man," Tom said. "You didn't have to do that." Marcus shrugged. "We look out for each other, right?" He shouldered his own backpack, thinking about the day labor spot 6 blocks away. If he hurried, he might make it in time to get picked for work. The thought of school flickered through his mind. Algebra problems and history books seemed like distant dreams now. He kept that hope tucked away, safe and private, like a precious photograph you can't risk getting damaged. Stepping onto the busy sidewalk, Marcus joined the flow of morning commuters. Business suits and coffee cups rushed past him as he became just another face in the crowd, invisible in the early morning bustle of the city. The sun climbed higher as Marcus quickened his pace down 5th Street. His worn sneakers slapped against the pavement in a rhythm that matched his racing thoughts. The day labor spot was still 3 blocks away, and he could already see the crowd gathering on the corner. If too many men showed up before him, the contractors would fill their trucks and leave. He weaved between pedestrians, keeping his head down, avoiding eye contact. That was one of the rules he'd learned quickly. Don't draw attention. Be polite, but invisible. Exist without taking up space. A woman in a power suit nearly bumped into him while texting. She jerked sideways without looking up, her coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her cup. Marcus stepped onto the street briefly to give her room, then returned to the sidewalk. 2 more blocks. His stomach had stopped growling, replaced by a hollow ache that felt like it went all the way through him. The half granola bar had been something, but not enough. If he could land a full day's work, maybe loading trucks or cleaning out a warehouse, he might earn enough for a decent meal and still have a few dollars left over. That's when he saw the man. At first, Marcus thought it was just someone sitting against the storefront, taking a break. But the angle was wrong. The man's body slumped awkwardly to one side, his silver hair disheveled, one arm twisted beneath him in a way that looked painful. Marcus's feet slowed. The man wore an expensive-looking dark suit, the kind Marcus had only seen on businessmen rushing to their office buildings. His shoes were polished leather, not a scuff mark visible. But his face was pale, almost gray, and his chest barely moved. People flowed around the man like water around a stone. A young couple glanced down, whispered something to each other, and kept walking. A mother pulled her child closer and hurried past. A jogger swerved wide without breaking stride. Marcus stopped completely, causing a man behind him to grunt in annoyance and shoulder past. The day labor spot was still 2 blocks away. He could still make it. This wasn't his problem. The city was full of people who could help, people with phones, people without records, people who wouldn't immediately be suspected of something just for being present. But even as these thoughts ran through his mind, Marcus's feet carried him toward the storefront. He knelt beside the man, his backpack sliding off one shoulder. Up close, he could see the man's lips had a faint blue tint. His breathing was shallow and irregular. "Sir," Marcus said softly, "can you hear me?" No response. Marcus looked around desperately. A businessman walked past, phone pressed to his ear, eyes fixed straight ahead. A woman in yoga clothes jogged by without a glance. "Excuse me," Marcus called out to a man in a delivery uniform. "This man needs help." The delivery driver barely slowed. "Not my problem, kid." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the man's wrist, feeling for a pulse like he'd seen in movies. It took him a moment to find it, faint and unsteady. But there, the shop door behind him opened with a jangle of bells. A heavy-set man in an apron stepped out, his face already twisted in disgust. "What's going on here?" the shop owner demanded. "You bothering my customers?" "This man collapsed," Marcus said, keeping his voice level and respectful. "He needs an ambulance." The shop owner crossed his arms. "Probably drunk. Happens all the time down here. You need to move along before I call the cops." "He's not drunk," Marcus said firmly. "Look at him. Something's really wrong. I don't need some homeless kid telling me what's what." The shop owner's eyes narrowed. "You trying to rob him? That it?" Heat flashed through Marcus's chest, but he forced it down. Getting angry would only make things worse. It always did. "I'm trying to help him," Marcus said quietly. "Please, just call 911. The shop owner snorted and went back inside, muttering something about kids these days. Marcus looked down at the unconscious man. The morning sun reflected off the storefront window, making it hard to see clearly. He needed to do something. Carefully, Marcus shrugged out of his jacket, a thin windbreaker that had seen better days, but was all he had against the cold. He folded it and gently lifted the man's head, placing the makeshift pillow underneath. The man's skin felt clammy and cool. "Help!" Marcus called out to the passing crowd. "Please, someone call an ambulance." A few people glanced over. Most kept walking. A teenager stopped, looked at his phone, then at Marcus. "You want me to call?" "Yes, please," Marcus said, relief washing over him. The teenager raised his phone, but instead of dialing, he snapped a photo. "This is going to get so many likes," he muttered, already typing as he walked away. Marcus's jaw clenched. He wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all, at a world where people photographed suffering instead of stopping it. But screaming wouldn't help the man dying in front of him. "Sir," Marcus said again, leaning close to the man's ear. "Help is coming. Just hold on." He scanned the crowd again, more desperately this time. An elderly woman made eye contact, and for a moment Marcus thought she might stop. But she looked away quickly, her pace quickening. Finally, a young woman in scrubs, a nurse or doctor, maybe, slowed down. She saw Marcus kneeling beside the man and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling 911, she said, already dialing. "What happened?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "I just found him like this. He's breathing, but barely." The woman nodded, speaking rapidly into her phone, giving the address and describing the man's condition with words Marcus didn't fully understand. Unresponsive, shallow respiration, possible cardiac event. She knelt on the other side of the man. "You did the right thing stopping," she said to Marcus. "Most people wouldn't have." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. It seemed wrong that the right thing was so rare. The woman in scrubs stayed on the phone with the dispatcher, answering questions. Marcus stayed too, one hand resting lightly on the man's shoulder, as if his presence alone could somehow anchor the stranger to life. Time seemed to stretch and compress strangely. Marcus became aware of every detail: the way the man's expensive watch caught the light, the slight wheeze in his breathing, the texture of the concrete beneath Marcus's knees. As they waited, Marcus noticed the man's suit jacket had shifted. Something metallic glinted inside the breast pocket. Without thinking about whether he should, Marcus carefully reached in and pulled out a challenge coin. He'd seen them before, though he didn't know exactly what they meant. Military, he thought. Veterans sometimes carried them. The coin was heavy in his palm, worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. On one side was an eagle. On the other, words too small to read easily in the bright sunlight. Marcus slipped the coin back into the pocket, but not before noticing something else. A folded photograph, its edges softened with age. He pulled it out just far enough to see. A group of soldiers in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, squinting against harsh sunlight. The man in the center, younger but recognizable, smiled with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Marcus carefully tucked the photograph back exactly as he'd found it. These were pieces of a life he couldn't begin to understand, a life of purpose and belonging and service, things that felt impossibly distant from his own existence. The woman in scrubs looked up from her phone. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out," she said. "They're sending a full response team." Marcus nodded, his throat suddenly tight. 3 minutes. He'd already been here at least 10. The day labor spot would be empty by now, the contractors long gone with their crews selected and loaded into trucks. No work meant no food tonight. It meant another day of hunger. Another night lying awake, trying not to think about how empty his stomach felt. But as he looked at the unconscious man, someone's father, maybe, or grandfather, Marcus knew he couldn't have walked past. The cost of stopping was real and immediate, but the cost of walking by would have been something else entirely, something he couldn't afford to lose. Ms. Loretta's voice echoed in his memory from a conversation weeks ago. "You got to hold on to your humanity, baby. That's the one thing they can't take unless you give it up yourself." In the distance, sirens began to wail. The sound grew louder, cutting through the noise of traffic and conversation. People on the sidewalk started to slow, curiosity finally overcoming indifference now that the spectacle had official validation. The woman in scrubs stood, brushing off her knees. "You should probably stay until they get here," she said to Marcus. "They'll want to know what you saw." Marcus nodded again, his mouth dry. Talking to paramedics was one thing, but what if police came too? What if they asked for ID, started asking questions about where he lived, whether he'd touched the man's wallet? The fear was instinctive and learned from hard experience. But he pushed it down. He had stopped because it was right. He would stay because it was right. Whatever came next, he would face it. The sirens grew louder still, echoing off the buildings around them. Marcus knelt beside the unconscious stranger, his jacket still pillowing the man's head, and waited for help to arrive. Red and white emergency lights painted the morning scene in alternating flashes. 2 EMTs jumped out, moving with practiced efficiency as they retrieved their equipment. Marcus stepped back, giving them space to work. The woman in scrubs quickly briefed them. Possible cardiac event, unconscious for at least 15 minutes, shallow breathing. The EMTs nodded, their movements precise and professional. "BP's low," the first EMT announced, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around the man's arm. "Pulse is irregular." The second EMT gently lifted the man's eyelids, shining a small light. Pupils responsive but sluggish. Marcus watched, still holding his jacket that had cushioned the man's head. His hands felt empty and useless now. The small crowd that had gathered pressed closer, phones raised to record the scene. "Sir, can you hear me?" The first EMT called out loudly while checking vital signs. His hand brushed against the man's coat pocket, and something fell out. A heavy challenge coin that clinked against the pavement. The EMT picked it up, glancing at it quickly. His entire body language changed in an instant. "Oh my God," he whispered, then turned to his partner. "Sarah, look at this." The female EMT leaned over, her eyes widening as she read the ID. She straightened up immediately, her spine stiffening like a soldier coming to attention. "This is General Robert Hale," she said quietly, her voice thick with respect. "Four-star general, retired." Marcus didn't fully understand what that meant, but he could feel the shift in energy around him. The EMTs moved with even greater urgency now, their actions taking on an almost ceremonial precision. "Get the cardiac monitor," the first EMT ordered, "and call ahead to Memorial. Tell them who's coming." As they worked, the general's eyes fluttered open. His gaze was unfocused, confused. His hand shot out suddenly, grabbing Marcus's wrist with surprising strength. "Sir?" Marcus said softly, instinctively leaning closer. The general's eyes locked onto Marcus's face. His lips moved, forming words with visible effort. "Don't let them forget the men," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then his eyes rolled back, and his grip went slack. "BP's dropping," the female EMT announced. "We need to move now." The screech of tires announced the arrival of a police car, its blue lights joining the ambulance's red and white display. Two officers stepped out, immediately scanning the scene with suspicious eyes. "What's the situation here?" the first officer demanded, his hand resting casually on his belt near his weapon. "Medical emergency," the male EMT replied tersely. "Four-star general down. We're transporting to Memorial." The officer's demeanor changed instantly, but not in the same way as the EMTs. Where the medical team had shown respect, the officers showed suspicion. Their gaze zeroed in on Marcus. "You!" the second officer called out, pointing at Marcus. "Step over here." Marcus complied slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He'd been through this before. He knew the drill. "What's your involvement here?" the first officer demanded. "I found him collapsed on the sidewalk," Marcus explained calmly. "Called for help and stayed with him until the ambulance came." "Uh-huh." The officer's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word. "Put your hands on the wall. Spread your legs." Marcus complied, his cheek pressed against cold brick as the officer patted him down roughly. Behind him, he could hear the EMTs loading the general onto a stretcher. "What's in the backpack?" the second officer asked. "Just my stuff," Marcus answered. "Some clothes, a water bottle." They made him take off his backpack and empty it onto the sidewalk. His few possessions scattered across the concrete: a threadbare t-shirt, an empty water bottle, a plastic bag containing his toothbrush and soap, a worn library card, his only form of ID. The woman in scrubs stepped forward. "Officers, he was helping? I saw the whole thing. Ma'am, please step back." The first officer cut her off. "This is a police matter now." The EMTs were closing the ambulance doors. Nobody had thanked Marcus. Nobody had even acknowledged him except to treat him like a suspect. "Name?" the second officer demanded, pulling out a notepad. "Marcus Hill." "Address?" Marcus hesitated. "No fixed address," he admitted quietly. The officers exchanged a look. "Of course not," the first one muttered. "Listen carefully," the second officer said, leaning in close. "Whatever you're planning, whatever angle you're working, drop it. This isn't some random mark you can scam. This is a decorated military officer. You understand me?" "I was just trying to help," Marcus said softly. "Yeah, sure you were." The officer's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Now move along. If we see you around here again, we'll have a different kind of conversation." Marcus knelt to gather his scattered belongings, aware of the officers watching his every move. The shop owner stood in his doorway, arms crossed, wearing an expression that clearly said, "I told you so." The ambulance pulled away, its siren starting up again as it merged into traffic. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment over. The woman in scrubs was gone, probably late for her shift now. The officers returned to their car, but remained parked nearby, watching. Marcus stood alone on the sidewalk, his thin jacket clutched in his hands. The morning had grown warmer, but he felt cold inside. His stomach growled, reminding him that he'd missed the day labor pickup. No work today meant no money, no food. The general's words echoed in his mind. Don't let them forget the men. Marcus wondered what men he meant, what memories or regrets had surfaced in that moment of consciousness. He thought about the worn photograph of soldiers, about the challenge coin heavy with meaning he didn't understand. Traffic resumed its normal flow. Pedestrians streamed past, already forgetting what they'd seen. The shop owner disappeared back inside his store. The police car finally pulled away, but not before the officers gave Marcus one last warning look. He stood there a moment longer, trying to process everything that had happened. He'd stopped to help someone in need. Something he'd been taught was right, was human. But instead of thanks, he'd received suspicion. Instead of appreciation, accusations. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting harsh shadows on the sidewalk where the general had lain. Marcus adjusted his backpack on his shoulders, its emptiness matching the hollow feeling in his stomach. He needed to move on, to figure out how to survive another day. But something kept him rooted to that spot, staring in the direction the ambulance had gone, carrying away the man whose life had briefly intersected with his own. The afternoon sun bore down mercilessly as Marcus trudged back toward the encampment. His empty stomach cramped, a sharp reminder of the granola bar he'd shared that morning. The sidewalk seemed longer now, each step heavier than the last. Sweat trickled down his neck, despite the cool spring air. As he approached the maze of tents and makeshift shelters beneath the overpass, familiar faces turned to watch him. Ms. Loretta sat in her folding chair, arthritis-twisted fingers working at a crossword puzzle she'd rescued from yesterday's discarded newspaper. "You're back early," she called out, her weathered face creasing with concern. Marcus managed a tired smile. "Yeah, things didn't go as planned." Word traveled fast in the camp. By the time Marcus reached his tent, a small group had gathered. Jimmy, who'd been living under the overpass longer than anyone, stepped forward. His salt-and-pepper beard couldn't hide his frown. "Heard you got mixed up with the police this morning," Jimmy said, keeping his voice low. "What happened?" Marcus sank onto an overturned milk crate, his legs grateful for the rest. He described finding the collapsed man, the military ID, the EMT's reaction, and the police questioning. As he spoke, he noticed the changing expressions around him, curiosity turning to worry, understanding giving way to fear. "A 4-star general?" Tommy whistled, scratching his head beneath his worn baseball cap. "That's about as high up as they get." "You did the right thing," Ms. Loretta insisted, having hobbled over to join the group. "That's what matters." But Ray, the camp's unofficial leader, pushed through the small crowd. His face was hard, years of street wisdom etched into every line. "Being right don't keep you safe," he said flatly. "Being noticed gets people like us erased." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. They'd all seen it happen, how attention, even good attention, could lead to sweeps, to cleaning up the area, to their entire community being scattered to the winds. "The police took down your name?" Ray pressed. Marcus nodded wearily. "Yeah, searched my bag, too." "Jesus, kid." Ray ran a hand over his face. "You know what that means. They'll run it, find out you're homeless, maybe dig up that time you ran during the sweep last winter. Then we're all tagged as a problem area." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He hadn't thought about that day in months, how he'd panicked when the police arrived without warning, how running had seemed like his only option. He'd gotten away, but the guilt of leaving others behind still haunted him. His stomach growled loudly, breaking into his thoughts. The sound drew concerned looks from those nearby. Everyone knew what missing a day's work meant. "Here," Ms. Loretta said, pulling a slightly squashed sandwich from her bag. "Got it from the church lunch program. Was saving it for later, but you need it more." Marcus started to protest, but she pressed it into his hands. "You shared your breakfast," she reminded him. "Let me share too." The bread was slightly stale, but Marcus couldn't remember anything tasting better. He forced himself to eat slowly, making it last. Around him, the crowd gradually dispersed, returning to their own struggles and survival routines. As afternoon faded into evening, the first police cruiser rolled past. It moved slowly, deliberately, spotlights sweeping across the tents. Everyone froze, conversations dying mid-sentence. The car passed without stopping, but 15 minutes later, another one came by. Then another. "They're letting us know they're watching," Ray muttered darkly. All because of one rich man in a fancy coat. Marcus retreated to his tent as darkness fell. But sleep wouldn't come. The general's words kept echoing in his mind. "Don't let them forget the men." What men? The soldiers in that worn photograph? The veterans he sometimes saw at the camp, still wearing bits of their old uniforms like armor? A light rain began to fall, pattering against his thin tarp. Small droplets found their way through worn spots, landing on his face. The sound of traffic overhead mixed with the rain, creating a rhythm that usually lulled him to sleep. But not tonight. He curled tighter around his backpack, using it as both pillow and anchor. The day's events tumbled through his mind. The general's collapse, the EMT's sudden shift from routine to reverence, the police officer's immediate assumption of guilt. He'd tried to do the right thing, to help someone in need, just like others had sometimes helped him. But Ray was right. Good intentions didn't guarantee good outcomes. The rain intensified, and Marcus felt a steady drip developing near his feet. He'd need to find another tarp soon. But those were hard to come by. Everything was hard to come by. The hunger in his stomach had dulled to a familiar ache, but the worry in his mind kept sharp edges. More droplets found their way in, forcing Marcus to shift position. His socks were damp now, and he knew from experience they wouldn't dry properly tomorrow. He'd have to be careful to avoid blisters if he managed to find work. If the police would even let him back in that area. Voices murmured outside. The night watch. Residents who took turns staying alert for trouble. Their hushed tones carried worry tonight, discussing the police drive-bys, wondering if they should start packing up, be ready to move fast if needed. Marcus pressed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sounds, the worries, the doubts. Had he done the right thing? Or had his attempt to help one person put everyone at risk? The general's grip had been so strong, his words so urgent. But what good was remembering the men if it meant forgetting the people right here, right now? A car engine rumbled nearby, different from the police cruisers, deeper and smoother. Marcus might have ignored it, but other sounds followed. Multiple engines, tires on wet pavement, doors opening with expensive-sounding clicks. He opened his eyes as bright headlights swept across his tent, so powerful they turned the blue tarp almost white. The beams held steady, not moving on like the police spotlights had. Through the thin walls of his shelter, Marcus could make out the silhouettes of multiple vehicles, large, boxy shapes that had to be SUVs. The entire camp went silent. Even the night watch stopped talking. In that tense quiet, Marcus could hear steady footsteps approaching, multiple sets, moving with purpose. His heart pounded as the lights continued to flood his tent, making it impossible to hide or pretend he wasn't there. More footsteps joined the first, spreading out with military precision. Through the rain and traffic noise, Marcus heard Ray's voice, tight with tension. "Which one of you is in charge here?" A deep voice answered, calm but carrying absolute authority. "We're looking for Marcus Hill." The SUV headlights cut sharp beams through the misty rain, casting long shadows across the camp. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as more vehicle doors opened with precise clicks. Through the translucent walls of his tent, he could make out tall figures moving with fluid coordination. Nothing like the usual stumbling police officers during their sweeps. Whispers rippled through the camp. Some residents melted into the shadows, while others froze in place like startled deer. Ms. Loretta clutched her crossword puzzle to her chest, eyes wide with fear. Ray stood his ground near the camp's entrance, shoulders tense but chin raised. The figures spread out in a practiced formation. Their civilian clothes couldn't hide their military bearing. The way they moved, the perfect spacing between them, the alert stillness of their stance. In the harsh vehicle lights, Marcus counted 20 men, their muscled frames suggesting strength held carefully in check. "Which one of you is in charge here?" A deep voice cut through the patter of rain. Ray stepped forward, his voice steadier than his hands. "I speak for the camp." A tall man with close-cropped hair moved into the light. Despite his casual jacket and jeans, authority radiated from his posture. "We're looking for Marcus Hill." The name hung in the damp air. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. His fingers trembled as they gripped the tent's zipper. For a moment, he considered staying silent, letting the darkness swallow him. But that wasn't who he was. Taking a deep breath, Marcus unzipped his tent and stepped out into the rain. "I'm Marcus Hill." 20 pairs of eyes shifted to him. The commanding officer, Marcus was sure that's what he was, studied him with keen interest. "Son, my name is Commander Wilson. We need to talk about what happened this morning." Marcus straightened his spine, trying to match their dignity, despite his soggy shoes and damp clothes. "Is the general okay?" Something like approval flickered across the commander's face. "General Hale is stable and receiving treatment. He specifically asked us to find you." Relief flooded through Marcus, followed quickly by confusion. "Find me? Why?" "Because you did something today that dozens of others wouldn't." Commander Wilson stepped closer, his voice pitched to carry just far enough for those nearby. "You showed courage and compassion when it would have been easier to walk away." Around the camp, tensions began to ease as people realized this wasn't a raid. The SEALs maintained their positions but stood more casually, some even offering slight nods to nervous residents. "General Hale is a decorated 4-star general," Commander Wilson continued. "He's spent his life in service to this country, and today, when he needed help, you were the only one who stopped. That matters to us." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what anyone should have done." "Should have, yes, but didn't." The commander reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "The general wants to thank you personally. This number will connect you to his office. Someone will contact you tomorrow morning with details." Marcus accepted the card, its crisp edges strange against his calloused fingers. The paper was thick, expensive, with an embossed military seal he didn't recognize. "Sir," Marcus said hesitantly, "I don't have a phone." Commander Wilson nodded, as if expecting this. He turned and made a subtle gesture. One of the SEALs stepped forward, carrying a small package. "Prepaid phone," the commander explained as Marcus accepted the package. "Fully charged, ready to use. Keep it close tomorrow." Ray moved closer, protective instincts warring with cautious hope. "You're not here to clear the camp?" "No," Commander Wilson said firmly. "We're here to find someone who showed exceptional character. Nothing more." He surveyed the scattered tents, his expression unreadable. "Your community is not our concern tonight." The commander turned back to Marcus. "Get some rest, son. Tomorrow will be interesting." He paused, then added more quietly, "The general doesn't forget those who help his men, and neither do we." With practiced efficiency, the SEALs began withdrawing to their vehicles. Their movements were so coordinated it seemed choreographed, each man knowing exactly where to go and when to move. Within minutes, they had disappeared into their SUVs. Commander Wilson was the last to leave. He gave Marcus a respectful nod, then melted into the darkness. The vehicles pulled away smoothly, their taillights vanishing into the night like a dream. The camp slowly came back to life. People emerged from hiding spots, gathering in small clusters to whisper and speculate. Ms. Loretta hobbled over to Marcus, her weathered face full of wonder. "Child," she breathed, "what kind of angel were you two this morning?" Marcus looked down at the card and phone in his hands, still struggling to process what had happened. "Not an angel," he murmured. "Just a man who needed help." Ray approached, shaking his head in disbelief. "Navy SEALs," he said softly. "Those weren't regular soldiers, Marcus. Those were SEALs. I served 2 tours. You don't forget how they move." He ran a hand over his face. "What exactly did you do today?" Marcus described the morning again, this time including details he'd left out before. The challenge coin, the photograph, the general's grip on his wrist, and mysterious words about the men. The camp stayed awake long after the SEALs left, too wired to sleep. Some residents were afraid the attention would still bring trouble. Others saw hope in the unexpected visit. A few even laughed about how the mighty U.S. military had come looking for a homeless teenager. Back in his tent, Marcus sat cross-legged on his thin sleeping bag, turning the phone and card over in his hands. The phone was a simple model, but new and clean. The card's paper was so fine it almost felt alive against his skin. Rain continued to drip through his tarp, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind kept returning to the general's face, to those urgent words. Don't let them forget the men. Now, after the SEALs' visit, those words carried new weight. Hours passed. Marcus heard the camp slowly quiet as people returned to their tents. The traffic overhead thinned to occasional rumbles. Still, he sat awake, watching the eastern sky gradually lighten through the gaps in his tarp. Tomorrow would bring something new, something big enough that 20 elite soldiers had come looking for him in the night. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the stirring of real hope, tempered by healthy caution. Whatever was coming, he had chosen this path when he stopped to help a stranger. Now he would see where it led. The phone sat heavy in his palm as the first hints of dawn painted the sky. Marcus hadn't moved all night, keeping vigil with his thoughts as the world slowly turned toward morning. Morning crept over the tent city, painting the underside of the freeway in pale gold. Marcus's eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep. He'd dozed off just before dawn, the prepaid phone still clutched in his hand, only to jerk awake an hour later when a truck backfired nearby. The camp was already stirring. The morning routine hadn't changed. People lined up for the public restrooms down the block. Others packed their belongings before police patrols began. But today felt different. Glances followed Marcus as he emerged from his tent, some curious, others worried. Ms. Loretta waved him over to her usual spot. She'd saved him half a coffee from somewhere, the paper cup dented but still warm. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, patting the concrete barrier beside her. "Those men last night. That was something else." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thank you, Ms. Loretta. I still can't believe it happened." "When's the last time you ate, child?" He had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I guess." She clicked her tongue and dug through her carefully organized belongings, producing a package of crackers. "Can't meet important people on an empty stomach." The crackers were stale, but Marcus ate them slowly, savoring each bite. Around him, the camp buzzed with speculation. Ray paced nearby, occasionally glancing at Marcus with a mixture of pride and concern. "You got a working phone?" Marcus asked Ms. Loretta. His new prepaid phone wouldn't activate until 8 o'clock, according to the package. She handed over her ancient flip phone. 7 minutes left this month. Use them wisely." Marcus dialed the number on the business card exactly at 8. A crisp female voice answered immediately, as if expecting his call. "Mr. Hill, please hold for Lieutenant Cooper." His hand trembled slightly as a new voice came on the line. "Marcus Hill. Good morning. A car will pick you up at 1000 hours. That's 10 a.m. at the bus stop on Maple and 4th. Wear what you have, but try to be as presentable as possible. The general is looking forward to meeting you." "Yes, sir," Marcus managed. "Thank you." He had 2 hours. The nearest public restroom was 3 blocks away, attached to a park that turned a blind eye to homeless people washing up early in the morning before families arrived. Ray caught up with him as he gathered his few toiletries. "Marcus, listen. I know this seems like a miracle, but be careful. Sometimes attention from powerful people isn't what it seems." "I know," Marcus said quietly, "but I have to go. Maybe something good could come from this. Not just for me." Ray's expression softened. "You're a good kid. Too good for this place." He pressed something into Marcus's hand, a small comb missing several teeth. "Found it last week, cleaned it up. Might help you look sharp." Marcus's throat tightened. "Thanks, Ray." The public restroom was empty when he arrived, its fluorescent lights harsh against the gray walls. Marcus scrubbed his face and hands with cold water and thin pink soap from the dispenser. He did his best to wash his shirt in the sink, wringing it out and putting it back on damp. The comb helped somewhat with his hair. In the spotted mirror, he studied his reflection. A tall, lean teenager looked back at him, dark skin clear despite rough living, eyes tired but steady. His clothes were worn but clean now, his bearing straight despite everything. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "Dignity's free, baby. Carry it like a crown." Back at the camp, he found people had gathered to see him off. Ms. Loretta hugged him fiercely. Others offered quiet words of encouragement or warning. Someone had found a plastic bag for his few possessions. The bus stop on Maple and 4th stood in front of a boarded-up deli. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, heart pounding. At exactly 10 a.m., a black SUV with government plates pulled up. A young man in a suit stepped out. "Marcus Hill." Marcus nodded. "I'm Agent Taylor. If you'll come with me, please." The SUV's interior smelled of leather and pine air freshener. The seats were softer than anything Marcus had sat on in months. Agent Taylor drove smoothly, professional but not unfriendly. "It's about 40 minutes to the base," he explained. "Feel free to rest if you'd like." But Marcus couldn't rest. His eyes were glued to the window as the city transformed around them. They passed through downtown, where business people hurried along clean sidewalks. Then came neighborhoods with manicured lawns and children's bikes left carelessly in driveways. No locks, no fear of theft. The city he knew was different. Alleyways that offered shelter, dumpsters behind restaurants where day-old bread might be found. Benches designed to prevent sleeping. Walking everywhere, you learned which stores would let you use their bathroom, which corners were safe to rest on. Now the streets blurred past at driving speed, and Marcus realized how small his world had become. He'd walked these same roads countless times, but never seen them from this height, this speed, this remove. The distance felt both literal and symbolic. They passed the day labor corner where he should have been yesterday. Men still gathered there, hoping for work. Marcus watched them disappear in the side mirror, feeling suddenly untethered from his usual life. Agent Taylor maintained a respectful silence as they left the city proper, entering areas Marcus hadn't seen in years. They passed subdivisions, strip malls, and finally open land. Signs for the military base began appearing. "First time on a base?" Taylor asked. "Yes, sir." "Try to relax. Everyone's looking forward to meeting you." The base's entrance loomed ahead, a guard station, thick walls, razor wire glinting in the morning sun. Marcus's palms were sweating. He wiped them carefully on his jeans, trying to steady his breathing. The guard checked Taylor's credentials and waved them through. They drove past neat buildings, perfectly maintained lawns, and soldiers going about their duties. Everything looked ordered, purposeful, secure. The SUV pulled up to a low white building with a flagpole out front. Agent Taylor put the car in park and turned to Marcus. "Ready?" Marcus gazed at the building, his heart racing but his voice steady. "Yes, sir." He took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out into this new world. The recovery room smelled of antiseptic and fresh linens. Marcus paused in the doorway, his borrowed visitor's badge catching the fluorescent light. General Hale sat propped up in bed, his military bearing evident even in a hospital gown. Despite his illness, his eyes were sharp and alert. "Come in, son," Hale said, his voice warm but commanding. "Please, take a seat." Marcus moved carefully to the chair beside the bed, conscious of his damp clothes and worn shoes against the pristine hospital floor. A monitoring machine beeped steadily in the background. "I understand I owe you my life," Hale said, studying Marcus intently. "No, sir," Marcus replied quietly. "Anyone would have helped. But they didn't. I remember enough to know that. Dozens passed by. You were the only one who stopped." Hale adjusted himself slightly, grimacing. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus." Marcus folded his hands in his lap, choosing his words carefully. "I'm 17, sir. I've been on my own for about 8 months now. Before that, I was with my mother until she—" He paused, swallowed. "Until she passed. We'd been staying in shelters off and on for a few years. And school? I was in 11th grade when I had to leave. I tried to keep going, but without an address." Marcus shrugged slightly. "The school said they couldn't keep me enrolled." Hale nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yet yesterday, when you saw someone in trouble, you stopped. Even though helping me cost you a day's work. Even though the police gave you grief for it. It was the right thing to do, sir." "The right thing," Hale repeated softly. "You know, in my 40 years of service, I've found that phrase, 'the right thing,' gets used a lot. But doing the right thing? That's rarer than you'd think." He reached for a folder on his bedside table. "I've been making some calls." Marcus sat quietly, his heart beating faster but maintaining his composed exterior. "There's a youth leadership initiative," Hale continued, "funded through military outreach. It provides housing, education completion, and career development. I'd like to recommend you for immediate placement." The hope that bloomed in Marcus's chest was almost painful. He forced himself to breathe steadily. "Additionally," Hale said, "we can arrange temporary housing today. Get you somewhere safe while the paperwork processes." He pulled out several documents. "I know it's a lot to take in." "Why?" Marcus asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "Sir," he added quickly. Hale's expression softened. "Because you showed character when it mattered. Because you have dignity despite circumstances that strip dignity away from most people. Because," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "because I've spent my life in a system that claims to value integrity above all else, yet too often looks past people like you." A nurse appeared in the doorway with a clipboard, but Hale waved her away. "A few more minutes, please." He turned back to Marcus. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering opportunity. There's a difference." "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "I understand. Do you have questions?" Marcus straightened slightly. "The others in the camp, some are veterans. They served. They deserve help more than I do." Hale's eyebrows rose slightly. "We'll get to them. But right now we're talking about you. You're 17, son. You should be worrying about homework and prom dates, not where you'll sleep or if the police will sweep your tent away." He held out the papers. "This is a chance, not just for housing and school, but for a future. Will you take it?" Marcus accepted the documents with steady hands. They felt heavy with possibility. A different nurse entered, carrying a duffel bag. "The items you requested, General." "Ah, yes, thank you." Hale gestured to the bag. "Clean clothes, some basics. There's a bathroom down the hall where you can change before you leave with Lieutenant Cooper. He'll handle the housing arrangements." Marcus stood, clutching the papers and bag. "Thank you, sir. I don't know how to—" "Thank me by succeeding," Hale interrupted gently. "Show them what I already see in you." A knock at the door signaled Lieutenant Cooper's arrival. "Ready, Mr. Hill?" Marcus nodded, then turned back to Hale. "Sir? What you said yesterday, about not letting them forget the men—" "We'll talk about that soon," Hale promised. "For now, focus on getting settled." In the bathroom, Marcus changed into the new clothes. Simple but clean jeans, a fresh t-shirt, new socks, and sturdy sneakers. His old clothes went into the duffel bag. In the mirror, he looked like a different person. No, he looked like himself, but without the wear of the streets visible on his exterior. Lieutenant Cooper waited patiently in the hallway. The housing office has space ready. It's temporary, but it's safe and private. We can stop for food on the way if you'd like. Marcus followed him down the corridor, the papers secure in his bag, each step feeling more real than the last. For the first time in months, he walked with something more than just dignity. He walked with hope. The temporary housing facility stood 5 stories tall, its red brick facade warm in the evening light. Lieutenant Cooper helped Marcus check in, handling the paperwork while Marcus took in the clean, well-lit lobby. A security guard sat behind a desk, nodding politely as they passed. "Room 312, the facility manager said, handing Marcus a key card. "Dinner's served until 8 in the common room. Laundry's in the basement. Any questions?" Marcus shook his head, still processing the sudden shift in his reality. "I'll be back tomorrow morning at 9, Lieutenant Cooper said. "Get some rest." The elevator worked smoothly. No graffiti, no broken buttons. Marcus's room was on the 3rd floor, halfway down a carpeted hallway. The keycard beeped green on the first try. Inside, Marcus stood motionless, taking in the space. A single bed with crisp white sheets, a small desk with a lamp, a window with actual curtains, a private bathroom with a real shower. Everything was basic, but clean, functional, secure. He set his duffel bag down carefully, as if too much movement might make it all disappear. The carpet felt soft under his feet. He touched the bed. The mattress gave slightly under his hand, nothing like the hard ground he'd grown used to. A knock at the door made him jump. "Dinner service starts in 10 minutes, a staff member called through the door. "Just follow the signs to the common room if you're interested." Marcus's stomach growled at the thought of food. He'd barely eaten in 2 days. After washing his face and hands in the bathroom sink, hot water, instantly, he followed the signs downstairs. The common room was bright and cafeteria-style, with about 20 other residents scattered among the tables. The serving line offered actual choices: chicken or fish, rice or potatoes, 2 kinds of vegetables. Marcus chose carefully, still half expecting someone to tell him he wasn't supposed to be there. He sat alone at a corner table, eating slowly to make it last. The food was simple but hot and fresh. Through the windows, he could see the city lights coming on as dusk settled. Back in his room, Marcus found himself at loose ends. He wasn't used to having nothing to do. No immediate concerns about safety or shelter or food. The silence felt strange after months of constant traffic noise under the overpass. Ms. Loretta. He should call her. The facility had a communal phone in the hallway. Marcus dialed the number of another camp resident who had a cell phone, asking them to get Ms. Loretta. "Marcus?" Her voice was warm with relief. "We were worried when that fancy car took you away." "I'm okay," he assured her. "They gave me a room. It's temporary, but—" He trailed off, guilt creeping in. "How is everyone?" "We're managing, same as always. Don't you worry about us. Tell me about this room of yours." Marcus described it, feeling almost embarrassed by his good fortune. "It doesn't feel real," he admitted. "But it is real, child. And you earned it with that good heart of yours." Through the phone, he could hear the familiar sounds of the camp. Distant traffic, somebody's radio, voices calling goodnight. "The news people came by," Ms. Loretta continued, "asking about the general you helped. They're calling it a miracle rescue." Marcus frowned. "They came to the camp?" "Just to the edge. Didn't stay long. Their stories are all about him. Decorated war hero, saved by Good Samaritan, that kind of thing. They barely mention you're homeless." "Maybe that's better," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe so." She paused. "You get some rest now, in that real bed of yours." After hanging up, Marcus returned to his room. A small TV mounted on the wall was working. Another surprise. He found a news channel. General Robert Hale, whose distinguished military career spans 4 decades, was discharged from the hospital today following yesterday's incident. The anchor's voice was crisp and professional. The retired four-star general collapsed due to complications from an ongoing medical condition, but was aided by a passing civilian. That was all they said about him. Just a passing civilian. The story focused on Hale's career achievements, his military honors, his current work with Veterans Affairs. Marcus turned off the TV. He didn't need recognition. That wasn't why he'd helped. Still, something about being reduced to a passing civilian felt strange after everything that had happened. The bathroom mirror showed his reflection clearly in the bright light. Same face, same person, but standing in a different world now. He showered for the first time in days, the hot water seeming impossibly luxurious. The bed was almost too comfortable. Marcus lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar quiet. No traffic overhead, no rustling tarps, no whispered conversations between tents. Just the soft hum of the building's heating system. He thought about Ms. Loretta sleeping on her collection of flattened cardboard, about the veteran who'd lost his leg, who always positioned his tent to block the wind from the elderly residents, about the teenage girl who'd arrived last week, scared and alone. But for the first time in months, he didn't have to worry about them tonight. He could just rest. Maybe this was what doing the right thing felt like when it finally paid off. Not fame or recognition, but simple safety. A chance to breathe. Marcus pulled the clean blanket up to his chin. Tomorrow would bring meetings and paperwork, decisions and changes. But tonight, in this moment, he had a locked door, a full stomach, and a soft bed. Tonight, kindness had given him shelter. The leadership program's office occupied the ground floor of a gleaming downtown building. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the new clothes provided by the military outreach team. Dark slacks, a blue button-down shirt, and shoes that didn't have a single scuff mark. Lieutenant Cooper accompanied him, offering quiet encouragement. "Just be yourself," he said, as they approached the glass doors. "That's what got you here." The lobby smelled of coffee and fresh paint. A receptionist smiled warmly, directing them to a conference room where other candidates were already gathered. Marcus counted 6 others, all in similar business casual attire, though their clothes looked more lived-in than his. "Welcome, everyone," the program administrator began, her pearls catching the fluorescent light as she distributed folders. "We're so excited to have you all here for orientation." Marcus opened his folder, carefully reviewing each page. Application forms, health insurance paperwork, housing arrangements, educational assessments. The stack represented everything he'd dreamed of. Structure, stability, a chance. The administrator highlighted the program's success stories, showing slides of previous participants in caps and gowns, in offices, in military dress uniforms. "Many of our graduates go on to serve in various leadership capacities," she explained. "Some join the armed forces, others enter public service or the private sector." During the break, staff members circulated, chatting with candidates. Several approached Marcus, their interest obvious. "We saw the news about General Hale," one counselor said. "Such an inspiring story." "The General's Recovery Fund has received substantial donations," another mentioned. "The veteran community really rallied around him." Marcus nodded politely, uncomfortable with the attention. He hadn't helped Hale for recognition or rewards. The man had needed help. It was that simple. As the morning progressed, he noticed subtle shifts. Staff members who had been effusive earlier now gave brief, professional responses. Conversation stopped when he entered the break room. A secretary quickly minimized her computer screen when he approached her desk to ask for directions to the restroom. During lunch, Marcus sat alone, picking at his sandwich while trying to make sense of the change. Through the conference room's glass wall, he could see 2 staff members in animated discussion, glancing his way repeatedly. The afternoon session focused on background checks and security clearances. Marcus's stomach tightened as the administrator explained the process. "We conduct thorough reviews of all candidates," she said. "This includes criminal records, financial history, and previous addresses. previous addresses. Marcus thought of the tent beneath the overpass, of the shelters before that, of the times he'd run from police during camp sweeps. Nothing violent, nothing criminal, just survival. His phone buzzed with text messages from news outlets requesting interviews. One offered to tell his inspiring story of redemption. Another wanted to know about his troubled past. He turned the phone face down. Near the end of the day, he overheard two staff members talking around a corner. Background check came back. Unfortunate situation. Liability concerns. What about the general's recommendation? Marcus focused on completing his paperwork, his handwriting carefully neat despite his trembling fingers. He wrote down his current address, the temporary housing facility, and left blank spaces for the months before that. Lieutenant Cooper had left for a meeting, promising to return later. The other candidates departed one by one, their orientations complete, their futures seemingly secure. Marcus remained, waiting for final confirmation of his acceptance. The office grew quieter. Staff members began gathering their things, avoiding his eyes. The administrator's heels clicked against the tile as she passed, her smile now careful and contained. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Hill," she said. "Thank you for your patience." At 4:45 p.m., his phone rang. The number showed as Leadership Program Administration. Marcus stepped into an empty hallway to take the call. The administrator's voice was professional, practiced. "Mr. Hill, I'm calling regarding your program application," she began. "While we greatly appreciate your interest and acknowledge General Hale's recommendation, we've determined that your acceptance will need to be placed on hold pending further review." The words came like body blows, each one carefully neutral, yet devastating. "Additional background verification is required. Standard procedure in cases with limited documentation. No definite timeline for resolution." Marcus listened silently, his free hand pressed flat against the cool wall for support. When she finished, he managed a quiet, "Thank you for letting me know," before ending the call. Through the wall-length windows, he could see the city continuing its normal afternoon rhythm. People hurrying home from work, buses collecting passengers, life moving forward while his own progress ground to a halt. The new clothes felt stiff and foreign now. The folder of papers in his hand, all those pristine forms and promising documents, suddenly seemed to weigh 100 pounds. The elevator dinged, and Marcus turned, expecting Lieutenant Cooper. Instead, a janitor emerged, pushing his cleaning cart. The man nodded respectfully, then paused, noticing Marcus's expression. "You okay there, son?" he asked kindly. Marcus straightened his shoulders, years of practice helping him maintain his composure. "Yes, sir," he replied. "Thank you for asking." The janitor moved on, and Marcus remained in the hallway, holding his folder of paper promises, waiting for his ride back to temporary housing, trying to understand how quickly hope could evaporate in the face of who he was, or rather, who they thought he was. Marcus stepped off the bus near the freeway overpass, his crisp new clothes now wrinkled from the long ride. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across the encampment, but something felt different. People clustered in worried groups, their faces tense. Ms. Loretta hurried toward him as fast as her arthritis allowed. "Marcus, honey, they're trying to take it all away." Bright orange notices plastered every concrete pillar supporting the overpass. Marcus pulled one down, his hands shaking as he read, "Notice of immediate removal. All persons must vacate within 48 hours. Remaining belongings will be disposed of. They showed up right after you left," someone called out, like they were waiting. Marcus walked through the camp, noting how many residents were already packing their meager possessions. Some had simply abandoned their tents, leaving behind the few things they couldn't carry. A mother cradled her crying toddler while trying to fold a tarp one-handed. "Where are we supposed to go?" an elderly veteran asked, his voice cracking. "The shelters are full." Before Marcus could answer, angry voices erupted from the street. A small crowd had gathered, holding hastily made signs. "No more handouts," one read. "Stop playing the race card," declared another. "There he is," someone shouted. "The one who's causing all this." Marcus recognized a local news van pulling up behind the protesters. A reporter jumped out, microphone ready, cameraman in tow. They'd been running segments all day. Troubled youth uses general's goodwill. Questions arise about homeless heroes past. "Mr. Hill," the reporter called out. "Care to comment on allegations that you orchestrated this situation for personal gain?" Marcus stepped between the camera and the camp residents. "Please leave these people alone," he said quietly. "They haven't done anything wrong." Deputy Housing Director Elaine Morris emerged from a city vehicle, clipboard in hand. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she approached, wearing a practiced expression of bureaucratic concern. "Mr. Hill," she said, her voice artificially warm. "May we speak privately?" In a quiet corner away from the crowd, she outlined the city's proposal. "We can arrange immediate temporary housing for you," she explained. "A fresh start, away from all this unfortunate attention." Marcus watched a young boy helping his grandmother pack her medications into a plastic bag. "What about everyone else?" "The city has protocols for handling these situations," Morris replied smoothly. "But we can fast-track your case, given the circumstances. All we need is your cooperation in managing the narrative." Marcus understood the unspoken deal. His silence in exchange for salvation. But only for himself. "These people taught me how to survive," he said. "Ms. Loretta shared her blanket my first night here. Mr. James showed me which stores would give away day-old bread. They're not just statistics to clear." Morris's smile tightened. "Nobody likes this part of urban development, Marcus. But sometimes progress requires difficult choices. Think about your future." A construction crew arrived, parking their equipment at the edge of the camp. The rumble of bulldozer engines filled the air. More residents emerged from their tents, clutching photos, documents, medicines, the irreplaceable pieces of their lives. "My future?" Marcus looked at the community around him. "I'm looking at it right now." He walked away from Morris, ignoring her calls to reconsider. The protesters had grown louder, emboldened by the media presence. Someone threw a water bottle, which landed near a child's tent. Marcus picked up the bottle and walked to the front of the camp. Other residents joined him. Ms. Loretta with her cane, Mr. James in his faded veteran's cap, the young mother with her toddler balanced on her hip. They formed a quiet line between their community and the machines sent to destroy it. The bulldozer's engine revved impatiently. Morris consulted with police officers who had arrived to maintain order. Camera crews filmed everything, hunting for the most sensational angle. But Marcus stood his ground, the same way he had stopped for a fallen stranger when others walked past. The same quiet dignity that had impressed a general now radiated through his stance. He wasn't just protecting tents and tarps. He was defending the humanity of people society found it easier to ignore. A reporter thrust a microphone toward him. "What are you hoping to achieve here?" Marcus kept his eyes on the bulldozer. "The same thing everyone wants," he said. "A chance to live with dignity." The machines idled menacingly, their shadows growing longer as the afternoon waned. Marcus felt the weight of his community behind him, their trust as precious as the general's recommendation had been. He had lost one future today, but standing here, he was exactly where he needed to be. The protesters chanted, the cameras rolled, the bulldozers waited. And Marcus Hill, who had nothing left to lose but his principles, remained rooted between his people and those who would make them disappear. The pre-dawn air felt heavy with dew as Marcus stood at the edge of the encampment. Pink light barely touched the horizon when the first city vehicles rolled in, their headlights cutting through the morning mist. Workers in reflective vests emerged, clipboards in hand, their faces carefully blank. "They're starting already," Ms. Loretta whispered, clutching her thin shawl around her shoulders. The sound of rustling tarps and worried voices spread through the camp like a wave. Marcus watched as people began stuffing belongings into trash bags and broken suitcases. A young veteran named Mike paced in tight circles, his breathing sharp and uneven. The man had only been in the camp for 2 weeks, after his PTSD made keeping an apartment impossible. "Sir?" A woman in a pressed pantsuit approached Marcus. Her badge identified her as Angela Weber from the Housing Authority. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" Marcus glanced at Ms. Loretta, who was trying to sort through her medications with shaking hands. "I need to help." "This will only take a minute," Weber insisted, steering him toward a quiet corner near the concrete barrier. Her smile was practiced, professional. "We've reviewed your situation, and I have good news." She pulled out a folder, speaking in low tones. "We can process emergency housing vouchers for individual cases that meet certain criteria. Your recent publicity has created some unique opportunities." Marcus watched as a mother tried to calm her crying toddler while simultaneously packing their tent. The child's tears seemed to echo across the camp. "We have an immediate placement available," Weber continued. "Private room, shared kitchen, case management services. We could have you moved in by this afternoon." She paused meaningfully. "Of course, we'd need your cooperation in managing the broader situation here. A smooth transition would be best for everyone." The meaning was clear. Take the offer, walk away, stay quiet. More city vehicles arrived. Workers began marking tents with bright orange X's. Mike's pacing grew more frantic as they approached his shelter. "What about them?" Marcus asked, nodding toward his community. Weber's expression shifted to practiced sympathy. "Standard protocols will be followed. The city has resources." "The shelters are full," Marcus interrupted quietly. "The wait lists are months long. You know that." "This is an opportunity for you, Marcus," Weber pressed. "A fresh start. Don't let misplaced loyalty hold you back." Across the camp, Ms. Loretta stumbled, trying to lift her bag. A reporter's camera flashed, capturing her moment of vulnerability. Marcus straightened his shoulders. The same calm that had steadied him beside an unconscious general filled him now. "It's not misplaced loyalty," he said. "It's human dignity. And it's not just for some of us." Weber's smile tightened. "I hope you understand what you're turning down." "I understand exactly what I'm turning down," Marcus replied, "and exactly why I'm turning it down." Cameras turned toward them. Reporters who had been hovering at the edges moved closer, sensing a story. Marcus didn't raise his voice, but his words carried clearly in the morning air. "These people are my neighbors. They shared food when I was hungry. They watched over me when I was sick. They taught me how to survive with dignity." He met Weber's gaze steadily. "I won't accept safety that requires abandoning them." A reporter thrust a microphone forward. "Mr. Hill, are you refusing individual housing?" "I'm refusing to pretend some people deserve dignity more than others," Marcus answered. The camp had grown still, residents pausing in their frantic packing to listen. Ms. Loretta wiped tears from her cheeks. Mike's pacing slowed. A sharp voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Hill?" A man in a crisp military uniform strode purposefully through the crowd. His bearing suggested authority, but his expression was urgent rather than commanding. "Sir?" Marcus responded automatically. "I'm Lieutenant Cooper, aide to General Hale." The officer glanced at the city workers, who had paused in their marking of tents. "The general requests your immediate presence regarding this housing situation. Transport is waiting." Marcus hesitated, looking back at his community. Mike had started trembling again. Ms. Loretta clutched her medication bag like a shield. "They'll still be clearing the camp," he said carefully. Lieutenant Cooper's expression softened slightly. "The general specifically mentioned the urgency was related to preventing that outcome. He asked me to assure you this isn't a diversion." Still, Marcus paused. He'd trusted before, only to have hope pulled away. Ms. Loretta touched his arm gently. "Go, child. You stood up for us. Now let's see what standing up leads to." The lieutenant gestured toward a waiting car. Around them, city workers shifted impatiently. Cameras continued rolling, and his community watched with mixed fear and hope. Marcus took one last look at the camp, at the X's marking homes for destruction, at faces both worried and proud, before following the lieutenant. The car door closed behind him with a solid thunk, sealing him away from his community's fear and trust. As they pulled away, he pressed his hand against the window, watching the camp recede behind them. He didn't know if he was heading toward help or another disappointment, but he knew he'd chosen right. Some prices were too high, even for safety. The government building's hallways felt impossibly clean and quiet after the chaos of the morning. Marcus's footsteps echoed against marble floors as Lieutenant Cooper led him through a maze of corridors. The lieutenant's polished shoes clicked with military precision, while Marcus's worn sneakers squeaked softly. They stopped before a heavy wooden door marked Conference Room B. Lieutenant Cooper knocked twice, then opened it with practiced efficiency. General Hale sat at a long table looking smaller than Marcus remembered. The morning light through tall windows cast shadows under his eyes, highlighting the toll of recent weeks. Still, his posture remained military straight, his gaze sharp and focused. "Marcus," the general said warmly, gesturing to a nearby chair. "Thank you for coming." Marcus sat carefully, noticing how Hale's hand trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of water. The room felt too large, too formal for just the two of them. "I owe you several explanations," Hale began, "and an apology." Marcus started to protest, but Hale raised his hand. "Please, let me speak plainly, while I still can." He pulled a thick folder closer. "What you're seeing at the camp, the sudden urgency to clear it, the withdrawn opportunities, the media spin, it's not random. It's panic." He opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets and documents. 5 years ago, Congress allocated substantial funding for veterans' housing and support services. Money meant for places exactly like your encampment, where we know at least 30% of the residents are veterans. Marcus thought of Mike, still pacing anxiously back at camp, of others who never spoke about their service, but woke screaming some nights. "The funds were diverted," Hale continued, his voice tightening. "Shifted through shell programs, fake initiatives, ghost facilities, millions meant for housing and support, disappearing into private pockets." He pushed a document forward. Marcus saw columns of numbers, highlighted transfers, official stamps. "I started investigating quietly 2 years ago. The more I uncovered, the more resistance I met. Sudden budget reviews, lost paperwork, transferred staff." Hale's hand shook more pronouncedly as he reached for his water. "The day you found me, I wasn't just walking. I'd been gathering final proof from a contact at the Veterans Center, pushing too hard, despite my doctor's warnings. The stress triggered an episode." Marcus remembered the photograph he'd seen in Hale's coat. "The men in the picture, my unit in Afghanistan." Hale nodded. "3 of them lived in encampments like yours last year. 2 still do. The system they fought for failed them completely." His voice cracked slightly. "I failed them. But you're trying to fix it," Marcus said quietly. "Yes, but carefully, quietly, too carefully perhaps. Then you stopped to help a stranger, when everyone else walked past." Hale smiled tiredly. "You forced visibility, made the story public before they could bury it again. Suddenly, everyone was watching. Understanding dawned. That's why they tried to discredit me. Why they offered me housing to stay quiet. Exactly. You were never meant to be a symbol, Marcus. I never intended that burden for you. But your simple act of kindness accelerated everything." Hale straightened some papers with military precision. "I'm testifying before Congress next week. Going public with everything." Marcus thought of the camp, of bulldozers waiting to erase people's homes. "Will it be soon enough?" "With your help, yes." Hale met his eyes directly. "I need you to speak too. Not as a symbol or a hero. Just honestly. About what you've seen? The real human cost of this corruption." The request hung heavy in the air. Marcus remembered Ms. Loretta's trembling hands, Mike's anxiety, children trying to sleep through rain under tarps. They'll try to twist my words, he said carefully. Make it about race, or politics, or anything except the truth. Hale nodded. They will. But I've watched you, Marcus. You've stayed true to your principles without bitterness or performance. That authenticity is more powerful than their spin. Marcus thought about the sidewalk where he'd first chosen to help, about this morning when he'd refused safety at others' expense. The same choice, over and over. Dignity over fear. When do they need me to speak? The hearing starts Monday. Hale pushed a document forward. This is your official summons. Lieutenant Cooper will handle logistics. He paused, studying Marcus. Are you certain? There's no shame in protecting yourself. Marcus touched the paper, feeling its weight. With respect, sir, that's not true. Sometimes there is shame in protecting yourself. If the price is abandoning others. Hale's tired face softened. You're a better man than most I've known, Marcus Hill. No, sir, Marcus replied quietly. Just someone who can't walk past anymore. They sat in understanding silence as morning light filled the room. Outside, Marcus could hear phones ringing, people walking, the machinery of government grinding forward. Somewhere in that machinery, truth was about to break through. Lieutenant Cooper knocked softly, entering with more folders. Sir, the committee chairman is ready for your pre-testimony briefing. Hale stood carefully, gathering his strength. Marcus watched him straighten his jacket, transform back into the general he'd always been. Years of corruption were about to meet decades of military discipline. They walked together to the door, then parted ways. Hale toward his briefing, Marcus to a bench outside where he would wait. The hallway hummed with subtle tension, like the air before a storm breaks. The community center's ancient TV hung crooked on the wall, its screen flickering with C-SPAN's familiar logo. Beneath it, dozens of camp residents huddled on mismatched chairs and worn couches. Ms. Loretta gripped her coffee cup with trembling hands. Mike, the veteran, stood rigid against the back wall, his eyes locked on the screen. It's starting, someone whispered, as General Hale appeared, taking his seat before the congressional panel. Even through the grainy broadcast, his military bearings showed clearly. His uniform gleamed under the harsh lights, medals catching the camera flashes. But those who looked closely could see the slight tremor in his hands, the careful way he arranged his papers. General Hale, the committee chairman began, please state your purpose for appearing today. Hale leaned toward the microphone. His voice carried the weight of decades of command. I'm here to expose a systematic betrayal of our veterans and our most vulnerable citizens through the deliberate misappropriation of congressionally allocated housing funds. The room rustled. Ms. Loretta whispered a quiet, Lord, have mercy. For the next hour, Hale laid out his evidence with military precision. He named programs that existed only on paper, listed shell companies that absorbed millions meant for housing, showed photographs of empty lots where support centers should stand. 5 years of funds, he stated, nearly $40 million diverted from their intended purpose, while veterans, men and women who served this country, sleep under highway overpasses. The committee members shifted uncomfortably. One shuffled papers. Another checked his phone. But numbers alone don't tell this story, Hale continued. Let me tell you about Marcus Hill. The community center grew absolutely still. On screen, Hale described finding himself collapsed on that sidewalk. Dozens of people, educated, employed, respected citizens, walked past. But a homeless teenager stopped. He put my safety above his own security, knowing it could bring him trouble. He showed more integrity in that moment than the entire system we built to help people like him. A congressional aide approached the chairman, whispering something. The chairman nodded. We'd like to call Marcus Hill to testify, he announced. The camera found Marcus, looking steady in his borrowed suit, as he approached the microphone. The community center erupted in whispered encouragement. Mr. Hill, the chairman began, please describe conditions in your encampment. Marcus spoke simply, without drama or accusation. He described veterans unable to access services, elderly residents choosing between medicine and food, children doing homework by flashlight. "And why did you help General Hale that day?" a committee member asked. Marcus paused. "Because he needed help," he said quietly. "That's all anyone needs to know." The simplicity of his answer hung in the air. Even the chairman looked momentarily disarmed. The testimony continued into afternoon. Experts were called. Questions flew. But the tide had turned. The story could no longer be buried or spun. By 4 o'clock, breaking news banners flashed across the screen. An emergency injunction had been filed. The camp removal was halted pending full investigation. Federal auditors were being dispatched. The community center erupted. Ms. Loretta wept openly. Mike's military stance finally relaxed. Someone found coffee and donuts. The ancient TV continued broadcasting, but few were watching now. Through the windows, they could see news vans arriving, reporters setting up cameras. But this time, the story they told would be different. Not about charity or miracles or feel-good moments. About accountability. About systems failing the people they promised to protect. About change finally coming. Forced by truth spoken plainly. The sun was setting when Marcus's borrowed car pulled up outside. He stepped out, still wearing the suit, but with his tie loosened, looking drained but steady. The camp had gathered to meet him. Someone started clapping. Then another person joined in. Soon, the sound echoed off the concrete overpass, not just applause, but recognition. Of one of their own who had spoken truth to power and made it listen. Ms. Loretta hugged him fiercely. Mike offered a sharp military salute. Others simply nodded, their relief evident. They could stay. Not forever, perhaps, but long enough for real change to begin. Marcus accepted their thanks quietly, then slipped away to his tent. He sat on his thin mattress, still in his suit, listening to the familiar sounds of the camp at dusk. Generators humming, children playing, fragments of conversation and laughter. A reporter's voice drifted from somewhere nearby. In a remarkable day of testimony, decades of systemic neglect were exposed. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the sidewalk where it all began. One choice, made without hesitation. Help someone who needs it. That's all anyone needs to know. Morning sunlight glinted off the metal construction fencing that now enclosed the former tent city. The steady rhythm of hammers and power tools filled the air, where silence and uncertainty once ruled. Marcus stood at the edge of the site, clipboard in hand, watching crews install the first row of temporary housing units. These weren't the flimsy trailers he'd feared. Each unit came equipped with proper heating, running water, and enough space for basic dignity. They would serve as transitional homes while permanent buildings rose behind them, ensuring no one would return to sleeping rough. "Mr. Hill?" a city worker approached, hard hat in hand. "We need your sign-off on the family unit placements." Marcus nodded, studying the layout diagram. He'd insisted larger units be positioned near the community kitchen area, making it easier for parents with young children. "Ms. Loretta's unit needs to be ground level," he pointed out. "Her arthritis won't handle stairs." The worker made the notation without argument. That was new. Officials actually listening. Marcus had discovered his voice carried weight now, though he used it carefully. His title read Youth Community Liaison, but the real work was harder to define. He translated government forms into plain English, tracked down missing documents, and made sure no resident got lost in the system's maze. Across the lot, social workers conducted intake interviews under pop-up tents. Job counselors helped residents build resumes and practice interview skills. A mobile medical unit provided basic health screenings. The place hummed with purpose rather than desperation. "Looking good, son." The voice was weaker than before, but still carried that quiet authority. Marcus turned to find General Hale approaching slowly, leaning on a cane. The illness was taking its toll, but the general's eyes remained sharp and alert. "Sir." Marcus straightened instinctively. "I didn't know you were visiting today." Had to see it for myself. Hale surveyed the construction. Quite a change from 6 weeks ago. Marcus nodded. The transformation still felt surreal sometimes. The leadership program called yesterday, he said. They've officially cleared my acceptance. No conditions. As they should. Hale's approval was evident. Though I suspect you're learning more out here than any program could teach. He wasn't wrong. Marcus had discovered skills he never knew he possessed. Mediating conflicts, organizing resources, building trust between worlds that rarely connected. The work exhausted him, but it felt right in a way nothing else had. A commotion drew their attention. 2 residents were arguing with a contractor, voices rising. Marcus excused himself and headed over. He recognized the issue immediately. Miscommunication about storage space allocation. Let's break this down, he said calmly, stepping between them. He'd learned to address problems directly while diffusing tension. Within minutes, he'd helped them reach a workable compromise. The contractor left satisfied. The residents felt heard. That's the 3rd dispute you've handled today, noted Sarah Williams, one of the social workers. You have a gift for this. Marcus shrugged. I just remember what it feels like. Not being listened to. He checked his watch and headed to the community center trailer. The afternoon would bring more challenges, helping residents navigate paperwork, coordinating with city departments, ensuring construction stayed on schedule. But first, he had his weekly meeting with the housing transition team. Deputy Director Morris was there, looking uncomfortable as always. She'd been forced to implement actual changes after the congressional hearing, though her smile remained stiff. Other officials filled the small space, along with resident representatives Marcus had helped select. The permanent housing plans are proceeding on schedule, Morris reported. We expect groundbreaking within 3 months. And current residents will have first claim on units, Marcus confirmed, making sure it was noted in the minutes. As agreed, Morris replied tightly. The victory felt small, but significant. After the meeting, Marcus walked the perimeter of the construction site. Where tents had once huddled beneath the overpass, foundation markers now dotted the ground. Real walls would rise here soon, proper homes built to last. A young boy ran past, chasing a soccer ball. His mother called after him in Spanish, then smiled apologetically at Marcus. 6 weeks ago, she'd been too afraid to make eye contact with anyone. Now she stood straighter, more secure. The transformation wasn't just in the physical space, Marcus realized. It was in the people themselves, fear giving way to possibility, shame replaced by dignity. He watched another temporary unit being lowered into place, remembering his own tent that had stood there not so long ago. General Hale was right. This was an education no program could provide. Every day brought new challenges, but also new proof that change was possible. Not through miracles or charity, but through persistent work and refusing to look away from truth. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the new community center's entrance as Marcus arrived just after dawn. The building stood proud, not luxurious, but solid and welcoming, with large windows that caught the morning light. A simple banner hung above the door. Grand opening today. Marcus tugged at the collar of his button-down shirt, still unused to anything dressier than his old hoodie. People would start arriving soon for the opening ceremony, but right now, the quiet felt right. He'd refused to let them make a big production of it. No news cameras, no politicians looking for photo opportunities. Just the community, coming together to mark a new beginning. Movement caught his eye. A thin boy, maybe 14, hovering near the side of the building. His clothes were worn but clean, the way people dressed when they were trying to hide being homeless. Marcus recognized that careful effort to blend in, to avoid drawing attention. He'd perfected it himself not so long ago. The boy startled when he noticed Marcus watching, ready to bolt. Marcus stayed where he was, keeping his posture relaxed and open. He pulled an apple and granola bar from his bag. He still carried extra food, old habits dying hard. Breakfast? Marcus offered, his voice casual. They won't start serving inside for another hour. The boy hesitated, hunger warring with suspicion. Marcus set the food on the bench beside him and looked away, giving the kid space to decide. After a long moment, quick footsteps approached. The boy snatched the food and retreated to a safer distance, but didn't run. "I'm Marcus," he said quietly, still not looking directly at the boy. "I used to sleep under the overpass that was here." The boy paused mid-bite. "For real?" Marcus nodded. "For real. Almost a year. But now you work here?" Disbelief colored the question. "Something like that." Marcus finally turned to meet the boy's gaze. "What's your name?" A pause. "Tommy. How long you been on your own, Tommy?" The boy's shoulders tensed. "I'm not. I got places to stay." "Different couch every few nights?" Marcus asked gently. "Running out of friends who won't ask questions?" Tommy's silence was answer enough. Marcus remembered that feeling, options shrinking day by day, pride battling desperation. "It's cold out here," Marcus said. He shrugged off his jacket, the same one he'd used to cushion General Hale's head all those months ago. He'd kept it clean and mended, a reminder of where he'd started. "Here." Tommy stared at the offered jacket. "I know you don't need charity," Marcus cut in. "But maybe you need to know somebody sees you, really sees you, not just what they want to see." The boy's hands shook slightly as he took the jacket. Inside the building, lights were coming on as staff arrived to prepare for the day. Soon the classrooms would fill with GED students. The counseling offices would open their doors. The kitchen would serve hot meals without judgment. "They really help people here?" Tommy asked, trying to sound tough but not quite managing it. "They do," Marcus confirmed. "But more importantly, they help people help themselves. There's dignity in that." A car door slammed nearby, making Tommy flinch. "I should go." "You should come inside," Marcus countered. "Just to get warm. No one will make you stay or sign anything. But there's coffee, and the kitchen crew makes decent pancakes." Tommy pulled the jacket tighter, wavering. Maybe just for breakfast." Marcus stood, careful not to crowd the boy. "That's how it starts. One small choice at a time." They walked toward the entrance together, Tommy hanging back slightly. Through the windows, Marcus could see the first volunteers arriving, setting up for the day. Ms. Loretta was there, arranging flowers on the front desk. She caught his eye and smiled, but didn't draw attention to Tommy. The boy paused at the threshold, but Marcus didn't rush him. He remembered his own first step from survival to possibility. How massive that small distance had felt. When Tommy finally crossed it, the movement was quick and quiet, like he was afraid someone might stop him. Inside, the center hummed with morning activity. The smell of coffee and breakfast wafted from the kitchen. Voices called cheerful greetings. Tommy's eyes darted everywhere, taking it all in.